Yeah, so who exactly is WebPT? So as the slide states, our mission is empowering the $38 billion rehab therapy community to achieve greatness in practice. We do this through our innovative end-to-end software solutions enhanced by our billing services. We provide the tools necessary to maximize performance, revenue, and patient outcomes. Next slide. So WebPT actually started as a 3-person team in a coffee shop in Phoenix, Arizona, over 10 years ago, to having well over 600 employees today in several US-based locations. During the COVID pandemic, we began working from home and are now working on becoming a digital-first organization with employees in 29 states across the country. Next.
All right, thanks, Nate. So we also wanted to talk a little bit about how the PMO has evolved at WebPT. So like Nate mentioned, we started in a coffee shop over 10 years ago. And so how have we come to having such a large organization and a PMO? So the project management office at WebPT started as a team called Solution Delivery. There was a director at the helm prior to me, and he felt at the time, and many of you may be able to relate to this, that the PMO carried a certain stigma that would not really, fit in at the startup culture that we had at the time. But WebPT was growing up. That director ended up moving on, and I took over the director function, but we decided not to backfill his role. Like I mentioned, WebPT was growing up, so we stayed a PMO at that time, but it was really me as the centralized project manager who was working on our cross-functional initiative. We did have project managers distributed out in specific departments, and those department-specific project managers would work those intra-departmental projects. I would work those cross-functional projects. But as we got to 2019, you could see in the collaborating space and the rate that we were growing and how big we were getting, pretty much every project was cross-functional at that point. There were not that many that required project managers that did not go across multiple departments. So we started to collaborate informally. Then toward the end of 2019, we became one centralized PMO function. So in 2020, so my goal at the time was, okay, now we're one team, we're going to start building all our processes, we're going to, we're going to come together, we're going to scale. But of course, as many of you were impacted by COVID-19. So that kind of derailed our plan for 2020, as it did, I'm sure, pretty much everyone. So we were actually tasked as a PMO with getting everyone home so that we could work from home, driving policy creation around, how we were handling COVID as an organization, the communications around that, in addition to all the other planned projects that we had for the year. So it was interesting to say the least. But we spent 2020, after things kind of settled down, we spent 2020 rallying, but also kind of storming and forming as a PMO team. So I knew going into 2021, okay, we've set up this centralized team. We're starting to add more consistency to our processes. Now, how do we really scale to the next level? So 2021 for us is all about kind of norming and getting to that next level. So this is really what kind of led us to Smartsheet, and then also to Achievent to kind of help us implement. So next slide, please. So before we get too much into implementation, I kind of wanted to talk about what the PMO vision statement is. So after we, kind of had our individual worlds and then came together as one team. So what really is the vision of our function? So it really comes down to 3 main things, which obviously encompass lots of stuff: collaboration, consistency, and visibility. I think all of you probably deal with this,
collaboration, that's bringing those teams together cross-functionally. Consistency is really us
kind of growing up, right? So wanting to scale our processes, make sure that our stakeholders know what they can expect when they're working on a project with the PMO. They know how to find things, they know what the artifacts look like, etc. And then visibility, that kind of comes, that's something we're charged with, but that kind of comes with all of that consistency, being able to report out, being able to show things to our leadership, to our other stakeholders, and obviously for us internally to manage our own work. It really just allows for, overall better tracking, engagement from the business, and for us to kind of scale and be more efficient. So we took this vision, and that's kind of how we came to what exactly do we need from a solution. So next slide, please. So looking at kind of those three pillars, we needed an easy way for our stakeholders to engage with our projects. Things that, they may have interest in, things that they need from us, our project plans, our issue logs, dashboards, artifacts. Previously, we're a Google shop, and we were living in things like Google Sheets. There's other tools throughout the organization that some people were using, things like that. So it's very inconsistent. So we wanted to really, really hone in on that consistency piece. So we need to, in our old lives, we had, project plans in maybe 10 different places, or those of you who are familiar with Google, the folder structure, you have to be a little bit more mindful of how you're making that folder structure than maybe in a different type of environment. So we were running into those issues as we started working on larger projects, working across the organization. It became hard for us to locate things quickly, or it created a lot of work for us to be able to link back to all of those things. So it was just taking a lot of administrative time, and then obviously it was taking additional time for our stakeholders. And then lastly, like I mentioned on the previous slide, visibility. So if we're consistent, it really allows for us to present out our progress, issues, statuses, things like that, in an easier fashion. Previously, we were pulling slide decks together on a regular cadence, and those types of things can, it just takes time. It takes time to get it right, it takes time to talk to everyone. Now that we have things in kind of one centralized place, it's easier for us to just pull that information or to provide direct links out to our stakeholders. So that's kind of where we were from a scalability perspective. We're working too much on projects. We don't really have time for that administrative work, as I'm sure many of you think of it. All right, next slide, please.
Thanks, Linda. So we ended up choosing to implement the Smartsheet and Smartsheet Control Center. So why did we decide to go this route? So Smartsheet was actually already in the WebPT ecosystem. And other teams were using it already in varying degrees. And so this enabled us to easier change management, as it wasn't a brand new tool for many of the stakeholders. Now, there were some areas where maybe we needed some additional guidance for those users from the PMO team on how we're using the tool, but the interface itself was not new. Next, Smartsheet is spreadsheet based. So many folks in our organization are already familiar with this type of system and the option made for easier adoption. Lastly, we were looking for something with a flexible license option. Many of our stakeholders don't necessarily need to be in the details of the project so much, but need to be able to be notified or maybe interact or comment on a specific project with the PMO team, or to simply just retrieve some information. So we wanted a tool that did not require a full license across the entire organization. And with that, the help of the expertise of Achievin and Annapriya's implementation team, we were able to build out and standardize all of our project plans, other project templates, and reporting structure by combining what WebPT was specifically looking for in our requirements and what our process was, and then marrying it with Smartsheet best practices. Next. So now we'll actually talk about some of the use cases and benefits that we're starting to see with Control Center. So Control Center is useful as it allows for global updates across all projects within the Control Center blueprint. So an example of this might be for us. We recently actually made an update to our project status column within our project plans. So we added 2 new statuses that were not originally included during our implementation and rolled them out to all project plans. And that includes not only the template, but all in-flight projects, which eliminated any inconsistencies within our projects. Everyone's immediately ready to go with those new updates that are pushed out across all Blueprint projects. Next. So lastly, then we have the dashboard views, right? So dashboard views not only allow for easy day-to-day processing, but they also allow for easy data retrieval and reporting. By having all of our project information in Smartsheet, our team is able then to review our overall project performance, portfolio performance, and even discuss risks and issues quickly by identifying them from the dashboards. We have a couple actually examples of this within our organization that's been very beneficial for us. So first, reporting up to our senior leadership, as Linda mentioned earlier. The dashboard views allow us to quickly display product status updates, risks, and potentially even critical items requiring their attention. A second example of this is actually within our project teams and our team meetings. By providing a centralized location for all of our project resources, stakeholders are easily able to access all project artifacts without having to go to the multiple sources, multiple tools, and systems that Linda had mentioned earlier. So it really provides a quick and easy place for all of our project information to be held within a single spot, and provide some visuals for easy reporting and for status updates. Next.
All right, thanks, Nate. Yeah, so we also wanted to share with you kind of our project timeline at a high level. We are still in process of rolling this out to the organization. You can see we started, I think Amin mentioned, we started engaging toward the end of last year, and as we went into the beginning of 2021, that's when we engaged with Achievement to help implement the control center piece for us. So looking at February, we did our control center and template setup. Then going into March, our team, the PMO team, was trained. So really that was kind of part of our phase 1 of just getting that groundwork done. Then we moved kind of into phase 2. So now that we know what we're doing, we've got things set up, let's start moving all of our in-flight projects over there. So we did migrate the current projects. Part of the change management though is to keep our stakeholders engaged the whole time. So you can see once we got most of our projects over, moving into May, we did roadshows with our stakeholders. So what I did is I just went to each of the main departments that we work with, went to their regular team meetings. A lot of them will have like a monthly team meeting or maybe a weekly team meeting, and presented out, kind of similar to what we're presenting to you guys today. So kind of the evolution, why we're doing it, and what we need from them. So just a little bit more detail around that to kind of set the tone and the stage for them to know that they're going to start seeing this from our team and we need their help for it to be successful. So that was what we did during May. And then going into June, we're kind of fine tuning and making sure that everything really is in Smartsheet. We had a few projects as we were going to April that were almost done. It's like, do we want to move those over or not? So now we're reevaluating. We're making sure that we're 100% ready to kind of let go of our previous tracker. And everything is looking good in there. We're up and running. And then as we go into July, we're going to start launching our dashboards. And like I mentioned, we're a Google shop. So we actually have a PMO Google site, which would be maybe like a SharePoint site, or kind of an internal intranet site. And that we have one for our PMO team that has a lot of, information, artifacts, things like that. So we're going to be launching all of this information on that site for our internal stakeholders. And then I think as most of you know, change management doesn't end with, okay, now we're done. So as we go through the last piece of this year and then obviously ongoing, but really my focus from August through October will be really just reinforcing the messaging that I did in our roadshows, working with our senior team, working with the PMO team and making sure that we're being consistent, we're reinforcing those messages, and hopefully as we go into 2022, it'll be much more the norm for our stakeholders, everyone to be utilizing that software, utilizing the benefits of seeing the reporting, and so on. So far it has been great. It's really helped. I utilize our dashboards in my one-on-one syncs with the team. It also helps me when I'm in, discussions with our senior leaders, so that I can just kind of pull up either a list of projects or pull up a specific dashboard and start having those conversations. So far it's been really great. I think now we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So James, do we have some questions?
Well, the one thing I really wanted to touch on was for change management. What are some insights that you might have there when it comes to implementing a new process?
Yeah, at least for me, and I would say for many folks, change management is a big challenge. Especially for me, I come from much larger companies, and we would, have a change management function. So I would rely on like the leader of our change management team to help me with these things. At a smaller company, as Nate can attest to, we have to, as project managers, we have to do all of that work ourselves. We don't have the luxury of hiring a change management expert. So for me, the biggest thing and the biggest gap that I have found for myself, so I try to remember it, is just the reinforcement of the messaging. So a lot of times I'll see people will, hey, we have this change, and there's one email. Well, if you have new employees, if you're getting 1,000 emails a day, you're not going to remember the one email. So it's like, how do we reinforce that to the organization, to ourselves, to everyone around it? This is what we're using. This is where you need to go find that thing. So if someone asks me for, I need a status update on something, ideally I'll say, maybe I give it to them, but you can also check it here. So it's us having that mindset of the continuous reinforcement. And not really enabling the org to go around that process, which takes discipline. And I personally think it's one of the hardest parts of project rollouts, but I also pay the most attention to it because of that.
No, that's awesome. And I agree 100%, but that's hugely insightful. So thank you. And then the question that I think everybody would learn the most from is, so if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? If you would, maybe it went perfectly, but.
Ideally, so you saw the timeline from an execution perspective. I don't know that I would do anything differently. Ideally, I would like us to have evolved a little bit quicker, and maybe got here a little bit sooner as a team. But circumstances are what they are, and we're also operating with, the other biggest thing that I don't think I talked about is having the support of your executive team. So in addition to your change management, you really need those executives to be in line with you and in agreement with what we're implementing, because if they're not going to use it or don't have a desire to use it or are against it in some way, then it's never going to take hold. And so the evolution may kind of seem long, and it seems long to me, but it was in line with what our executives were ready for at the time. And so ultimately I would have liked to have gone a little bit faster. But it is what it is. And it's kind of, we're at this point where we have really good executive support for our team and what our team is doing. So, while it took longer, I think we're at a place where we're going to see really great success. Nate, I don't know if there's anything from an implementation perspective that maybe you would do differently, or if you have any other insights.
Yeah, no, honestly, not really. I mean, from an implementation standpoint, things were really smooth. I mean, I think, from WebPT's standpoint, it helped a lot that Linda had our processes already, dialed in pretty tight, right? And so that is a good foundation when we're trying to push that into more of a system that helps us to automate that and make it, easier for everybody. So really within the implementation, Anupriya's team was great. There's of course a few changes along the way based on how things were looking, or after we got in the system and were able to kind of mess around with it and actually use it a little bit. Oh yeah, let's refine this here and there, but really nothing that was a standout in my opinion.
No, it's super helpful. And one thing that I recommend for people who maybe don't have executive support is we have a program called the Mobilizer program that you can sign up for, and it has different content in there for conversations, but also some ROI calculators to make that conversation a lot easier to get where Linda and Nate are today. And so Thomas had a question that was interesting. Did you, by any chance, review other tools before selecting Smartsheet?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yes, our organization, our CFO, our function reports into the CFO, so obviously we had to look at multiple options. But I kind of have a long answer to that. So kind of going back to the evolution, my predecessor had implemented a tool, and it did not go over well for kind of all the reasons that we've talked about. He didn't really have good executive support for it. It was also a pretty clunky tool, and it required a full license for the entire org to interact. So it was quite expensive. So I went away from it pretty quickly. As an organization, we weren't ready for, a big clunky tool at that time. We had pockets of the organization utilizing different project management software. People were just very resistant to it. So going into this, we did look at other tools, but I was very cognizant to look at tools that we had in the building. I knew from the past experience that we had, people still talk about that software and today. So I knew from that experience, it would not make sense to go outside of something that was, not in our ecosystem, just to kind of help from a buy-in perspective. That doesn't mean you should always do that. That was just how our situation was. You have to do what's right for your organization. But I would definitely recommend starting with knowing what your processes are, making sure you have in your mind what you want that day-to-day look like. Start trying to formalize those processes before you find a software. That way, in your software search, you're going to be a little bit more successful because you're going to be very clear about what your requirements are. And that's how you're going to find a good fit for your organization versus the other way around of just trying to. And I think that's what kind of happened with us before. We were like, we need a project management software, without really having those processes in place and knowing what we really wanted. And, it became an expensive mistake. And that, my actual first order of business when I took over was to deprecate that system, which we did immediately. So
something you always want to avoid. Danielle, kind of going off of what you had already mentioned, though, how do you bring new leadership into the fold so they know, see what and how and why the system that you put in place?
That's a great question, and that's something that is on my roadmap. If anyone's following WebPT, we've actually had a few executives leave over the last year or so. So that's definitely something we're going to have to do. The way that I look at it is, it comes down to that reinforcement piece. So if I am disciplined and reinforcing ways that I am working with the senior team, then it's just going to kind of happen naturally. An example is we have a senior leadership team every Monday. As part of the PMO, I'm fortunate enough to be, have a seat at the table there. And we're changing the way that we're reporting out. And part of that is the needs of the organization, but also a catalyst of, these dashboards and things that I'm going to have. So obviously, if you're at that level, you're going to start having a seat at the table. You're going to hear me talking about it over and over. You're going to have access to it very quickly. When I meet with each of them individually and we review things that are going on in their teams, and I'll be using those dashboards to have those conversations. So at that level, that is one way that we're doing it. Then you kind of have the middle leadership layer. There's a couple things there that I see that are important. One, many of them are working on projects with us. They're going to get exposure through the project. So that's where Nate, other PMs, we have to be very consistent with what we're showing, what we're sending, how we're operating. And then, part of that reinforcement piece that I have to put in place is how am I going to continually meet with them? Are we going to, make sure, a couple ideas that we have is like making sure that links to the dashboards on our Google site are in our regular communications with the organization, either from the PMO. We have a centralized kind of culture team that sends out newsletters, things like that. So making sure that we're visible in those consistent communications that are coming out. And then ideally, we're kind of revamping our employee onboarding process, and I would like PMO to be in that in some way. Not us actually doing things, but, an introduction to what our function is in that process. So just kind of making sure we're permeated throughout the organization, utilize things that are already in place, so you're not having to create new things, and then, creating our own things as we see fit. But it kind of comes down to that consistency, discipline, and reinforcement.
Those are great to reiterate. And this is kind of a big question in a few words. What kind of PM method does your company use? Agile? And how do you leverage Smartsheet to help you leverage that better?
That is a great question. We are, this is not a super easy question. We're typically, one thing that I didn't cover is the scope of what our team does. So we actually manage projects that, the easiest way to say what we don't do, and that is the software that goes out the door. So we're a software company. We do not manage the process between product and engineering to get software features and bug fixes and things out the door. That's the only thing we do not touch. We do everything that is, related to internal software implementations. Nate was just on a phone implementation project. We also support, because we're a growing up company, we're starting to take on more enterprise clients, and we've actually supported the onboarding process for those. We're not typically the onboarders, but when it comes to those larger ones where there's tentacles across the organization, we've actually stepped in to help there. And so we have a lot on our plate. So from a methodology perspective, we're typically more waterfall. However, we do have a lot of projects that we're doing for the first time. So we find things to be very iterative. So we have our basic, methodology kind of built out in Smartsheet, but it typically is more waterfall. We're not necessarily running things from an agile perspective.
So that's super helpful, and I think you answered that question really well, so thank you. And I want to say thank you to you both for sharing your story today and taking some questions. Can't say thank you enough for your perspective. It's invaluable, and I think your approach to change management is super helpful to hear, even for me as well, internally at Smartsheet, so thank you. And so with that, we want to transition over to Anupriya, and while we have that going, we're going to do a quick poll just for insight to see, what you're looking to do in the coming year. So we'll give that a few moments, but go ahead and Anupriya, handing off to you.
Thank you, James. All right, so everyone, today we'll be taking a quick look at Smartsheet Control Center and 10,000 feet. Now, as Linda and Nate mentioned, that Smartsheet Control Center helped them ramp up their project management to a whole new level, right? The best feature that I would say about Control Center is it helps you scale your PMO, or it helps you scale your projects in a very controlled manner, right? Now with that, I'm going to give you a small example of how I have set up this system. How this works is anytime anybody in your organization needs to have a project created or a project workspace created, they just fill in a simple form like this and submit the request to you. Now you, as somebody who's managing all these projects, has the ultimate flexibility to allow which projects should be created, which should not be created, depending upon whether you have the complete information or not. You can introduce multiple aspects here, like scoring a project on different criteria, right? And only if a project meets a certain score is it added to the pool of projects that can be created, right? Now, this is the place where you control which projects get created. Now, how I've set up this control center is that every time a new project request comes in and it's approved by the relevant people in the team, I need to create all these files for that particular project, right? And I want that as soon as a new project comes in, I need to have a project dashboard that's up and running with all these information filled in, right? And with all the reports being populated. Now, if somebody were to do this using a normal creating folder templates or maybe creating duplicates of the existing folders, it will take them at least half a day or a full day to create all those links, right? And this is just, I'm talking about the project level. But with Control Center in place, what they need to do is simply just click on Create Project, select the blueprint. It already has all the templates that I wanted to create, right? And just simply select the project that they want to create. And that's it. This is all you need to take to create all those files that I just showed you, 8 or 9 templates, a dashboard, and multiple reports, right? Along with being in control of the whole process, right? So that's how convenient Control Center makes your project management practice. With Control Center, you can roll up this information on a portfolio level, do your reporting on the portfolio level, and not just for a single type of template view. You can have multiple different templates related to each team, and you would still be able to report that information on a portfolio level, right? And I'll show you how that would look like once this is done. So you can report on any different metrics from each of these projects. Each of these projects will have all the data information that you collected using your intake process updated as soon as the project is created.
Perfect. And apologies for interrupting, Anupriya, but with implementation, when it came to Nate and Linda's Control Center, like putting together the Control Center portion is probably the easier part, but putting together the process and what you wish to accomplish is probably the more difficult. So what are some of the tips or steps there that you recommend to people looking to do that?
That's a really good question, James. So as I always like to say, if you have a process clear in your mind, it's only then that we should go to the tool, right? The tool can only help us that much, right? So in case of, for example, in case of WebPT and in case of the other projects that we work with, the most important thing is, what do you actually want the tool to do? Forget about scaling, but what do you want to do when you're talking about a single project, right? So now in this case, when I talk about a single project, what I want is, I want to have a certain number of things that I want to track. For every project, I want to track what are the activities that are going on in that project, right? Along with that, I probably want to see some sort of change log tracking or some sort of RAID log tracking, right? I need all this on an individual project level. But at the same time, I do want to make sure that if there are certain things that I want to escalate to a medium management level or to an executive management level, I do have those options as well, right? So with all those things in mind, we created all these artifacts and this project dashboard that we just talked about, right? So I'm just quickly going to show you what this sample project looks like, the one that I just created. It has all the information filled in, right? And as soon as I change stuff right here, it changes throughout in my portfolio reporting as well. So what I'm going to quickly do is show you how that change gets reflected. Yeah. And I'm going to mark a few of these as 100% complete. So this is on an individual project level, right? This is something that I did on an individual project level. Everything's working fine, right? And the same changes are being reflected on my dashboard as well. So as soon as I updated the status, everything is updated here as well. Now, how do I actually roll up this information on a portfolio level? As a PM, if you're managing this one project, you only need to be concerned about this one project. Everything else is being taken care of by Control Center. what Control Center does is it automatically updates all the information on the portfolio level as well. So I had 5 active projects. I created another one. And with that, I have 6 active projects right now. 4 of them are on track, right? All this information is being updated in real time on a portfolio level as well. As and when I have any escalations in the rate that need to be brought to notice on a portfolio level, that is being done here as well. I'm keeping a track of all the metrics related to my projects. So I have all that information here. Even more so, I can have a split by who are the PMs working on this project and how is that going on. By phase, I can have as much slice and dice of the data that I want. And I'm going to quickly show you how Control Center links all these projects together. Now, what Control Center does is it takes care of how you update the information on a portfolio level. Now, as most of you mentioned that you are quite familiar with Smartsheet, so you know that there's something called cell links, right? Smartsheet creates these cell links across the project. It's picking up information from different sheets and giving me that one row of information that is relevant for me to take any decisions related to this particular project. Now, with that said, this is the portfolio reporting. Everything is in place and everything is done perfect. Now, how do I go about creating some sort of resource management around this project? Now, what I can simply do in this case is use 10,000 feet. Now, as somebody who's running a PMO, you have everything in place. You have your project plan in place. You have you've completed all the allocations, you have completed all the tasks, but you still want to know who is the team who will be working on it, right? That is where 10,000 feet comes into picture. So 10,000 feet is a resource management tool which focuses solely on, like the whole purpose is resource management, right? Working with this is also fairly straightforward. I'm going to set up this project in 10,000 feet right now. So let me just quickly, right. So what I can do is I can assign a lot of people who are working on these tasks to each of these individual tasks, and the same can be reflected in 10,000 feet. And I'll show you what that would look like. Now, once you know who are the team members who will be working on a certain aspect of the project, you can simply set up the resource management to connect it to 10,000 feet. As simple as that. Once it's connected, you can report on all your resources within 10,000 feet, and you have all that information on your tips. Right. So as soon as I add this project, I can go into 10,000 feet, look at all my resource management. Within 10,000 feet, you have a list of all your projects. You have the schedule for all your projects, right? Yeah. And I can see a view by projects or by people. So for each of the resource, I can see that, okay, this person is over allocated. So, and I can manage their allocation from right here. I can reassign the task. I can change the timelines if needed based on the resources working on the project. I also have the flexibility of adding or removing people or checking information by a certain person when it comes to assigning the resources. Now, that's not the only flexibility that we have with 10,000 feet. With 10,000 feet, we can also have people enter the time. So they can add their time entries right here, and you can compare it to the allocation within 10,000 feet. Along with all this, you also have the option to create customized reports. So you see the schedule here, you see what people are working on, but you still want to have some other different cuts of data that would probably help you manage your resources better. So you can do so by creating your customized report. And that is also fairly straightforward. You can simply select the metrics here that you want to focus on, and that's it. That would help you create and set up a report with all the data that you need. You can export these reports and use that to manage your resources. So that's a very quick overview of what Control Center and 10,000 Feet can do for you and how they can help you in managing your projects.